Welcome, Dungeon Plunger Union members. I have my +1 plunger, a cup of coffee flavored holy water, and a very special Union member with me today to help plunge the dungeon and flush evil down the drain. This week, we've opened up our player handbooks and called upon the dark powers to summon the Demon Lord himself from the Nine Hells. Welcome to the show, Robert J Schwalb.
Hey man, thanks for having me. I am so excited to be here.
I am so stoked to have you on the show. I honestly, every time I send out a query and it's to somebody of your stature, I always worry, like, am I going to get that rejection? Like, when you're trying to ask out the hot chick in school. And so to have you say, like, yeah, man, I'll come on the show is like, oh.
Oh well, I'm glad I could give you a happy ending.
So my first question, does the J in your name stand for Jason? Or is it some other top secret thing that you're not allowed to tell us?
It stands for John.
Okay. I was
Yeah.
hoping for something really exciting.
No, I'm the second Robert John Schwalb of a line of two. So it's yeah. I don't really. There might have been a time I thought about going by John. I liked it much better than Robbie, but I never actually did. I
You
stuck with Rob.
you never went for like Schwalb the second?
No, well, in my when I'm deep in my cups, it's Robert J. Schwalb Jr. Esquire, uh, uh, followed by random letters that I just throw together. But that's usually how I introduce myself when deep in my Malort cups.
Your history with gaming starts back in when you were, I guess, an early teen or maybe a little younger than that in your preteens. And you were into comic books with your friend Landon, right?
That's right,
All
right,
right.
right.
So the first thing that kind of came to my mind when I heard that was I was surprised because I never really pictured you as a comic book kind of dude. Like the first time that I'd heard of you was like the demon guy. Like everything that you came out with was like demon stuff. Are you still into comics?
Not so much. I was very interested in like my dad really it started me down the road of comics. He was into heavy metal and epic and Savage Sword of Conan, and my dad is a very talented artist, and I had ambitions to uh, do that as a career. And so comics were a great way for me to study the craft, but I became more interested in a lot of the stories. Um, so I would sneak down and read my dad's heavy metal magazines, which were not probably appropriate for a 10-year-old, but whatever. But I was really big into the Defenders. That was my comic of choice because it had all this strange occult stuff that was going with it, like the Son of Satan and Gargoyle and fighting Mephisto and Doctor Strange being in there. It was just a really neat comic book and very unlike anything else that was out there. Um, I mean, I read a lot of the X Men I was a collector too, and I had the first appearance of Cable at one point and some Batman year ones. But when I graduated high school and I was out on my own, actually, I needed rent money, and how I got that rent money was selling my comic book collection for pennies on the dollar, and so it got me 2 cartons of cigarettes, rent for a month, and a case of beer. So that was, I guess that was worth it. So after that, I was so disillusioned because I had I lost my, there went my giant size X Men #1, for example. Uh, I, uh, I just gave it up. Now I will still read. I do occasionally read comics. But usually in omnibus forums. So the Goon or I don't know if I got since here Monica. This is a really good one. Let me pull it out just because I feel like a nerd. I want to share my nerdery.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah, see, Monica, it's reversed to my thing, but it's by Daniel Clowes, and it's outstanding. It has probably the most upsetting final panel of anything I have read in a long time. So yeah, it's good. But so I don't read a lot of comics anymore, but I do every once in a while indulge. That was a long-winded answer for a simple question.
One of the things I notice, I think it's on Instagram, I follow you, and you read like a crap ton of books. How do you read so much?
I'm it's funny. It's like I'm very disciplined in some areas, and I am not disciplined in others. Right. So when it comes to reading and digesting video content, such as I do it in a very I have a very very particular pattern. So I will currently I'm reading about 79 books concurrently. And so I go through a rotation and I have a whole rule about the order in which I read these books. And when I get to 20% or more, it goes into regular rotation. And it's just this big, complicated, embarrassing mess of just nonsense. But I have read almost 150 books this year. So it's working for me.
That's incredible. I set a goal of 52 books this year, and I think I've only made I think I've got like 10 knocked out on that list.
There's still plenty of time left.
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna happen, but thanks for the moral support.
Yeah, gotta support the fellow readers out there. Yeah, books is probably reading books is it might just very well be the thing I enjoy most, and it I'm not sure I've always been a reader, but it's only been the last couple of years that I have tackled it more aggressively and seeking out things to challenge me uh, and crack open my brains instead of just reading the same. Farm boy makes good, picks up his sword, saves the world kind of BS that exhausts me. So yeah, and I read out of my genre too. So I mean, I do read horror and I do read fantasy, some science fiction, but I do read a lot of just straightforward fiction. So Don DeLillo, I really love. Who else? Jonathan Franzen. Um, yeah, and the list goes on.
Nice. So your writing career began with Mongoose Publishing for in terms of like your gaming products. I had no idea that you had written for Mongoose. It was kind of crazy because at the time when Mongoose first started publishing, like they were pushing out like an absurd amount of material. So what stuff did you do for Mongoose exactly?
Uh, you know, Mongoose was an interesting start, and I think that. Well, let me answer the question first, and then kind of explain. I had no idea what the hell I was doing. I was a gamer, and I was a deeply invested third edition gamer, and I knew that game inside and out. I probably knew it better than I know any other game, other ones that I've written, and probably better than I know some of the ones I've written. Um, and so when there during those early heady days of the D20 boom, there were more companies and more products than there were writers, and so a lot of people were very eager to scoop up the next generation of game designers to or content creators really to keep that money train rolling. Um, I pitched a witch class book to Mongoose, and that was so my very first book was a quintessential witch. I fixed it later in an issue. One of the had a Science Importance magazine, and I fixed some things in it, which is a better version of the witch than the one I created for that because I was very conservative in my design at that time, and because I wanted it to be, I was so concerned with making sure that it fit with the other classes. I wasn't really looking at or even knew how to actually break new ground. But I also spent more money than I earned on that book on research materials, uh, and that kind of got me started. Um, I guess I wrote that in 2002, and then it didn't come out. It took almost a year for it to come out, and I was nervous, excited because this is my first publication, and is this going to be the start of something? And so once I got that book, Mongoose signed me up for a second book, and then I was going to do a third, and then I started working for other companies, and that's when I hooked up with Green Ronin Publishing and the rest of my career. But those Mongoose days were interesting because now it's like I can't imagine publishing books like that, right? Because it was loaded with cheesecake line art, and it was, and they totally ripped off the trade dress from second edition complete books. So it was something, right? It was like leveraging the nostalgia thing and also seizing upon an opportunity that was there because of an appetite for content that even Wizards couldn't keep up with. So it was an interesting time.
When you were playing, because you're talking about third edition D&D, this was like your game. Was there when it came out, were you like, "Oh my God, this is like the edition of D&D that I've been looking for all these years?"
Uh, yeah, it was a. So I was a late adopter of second edition. I stuck with first edition and AD&D well into the second edition's lifespan, and it wasn't until Dark Sun forced my hand before I shifted over. And so we would still play first edition AD&D all the time, and I objected on some bizarre grounds that that only you would object to things when you're 16 or whatever. About how we lost the assassin, the monk, and a lot of the cool stuff that made D&D so bizarre was just gone. And of course, I was among the crowd of angry people that demons were Tenery and or devils were Badazu, etc. But once I got into playing second edition and really and discovered the writers and designers of that era, I mean, that's when Monty Cook and Bruce Cordell were kind of making their first big noisy bangs, and they just lit my brain on fire. So when there was an opportunity for when they were starting to think about doing a third edition D&D, I remember there was a survey in Dragon Magazine, and you could fill out the card and say what you wanted, how much you play, and all the usual survey stuff. And I'm like, don't give me a third edition. I don't want a third edition. Second edition's perfectly fine. Just clean up the books. Blah 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 blah. Third edition comes out, and it's a revelation, right? It's a I was just thinking the other day about how good those first three core rule books were. I mean, there were some bizarre bits, right? Like there were problems with stacking bonuses and things that I don't think anybody really appreciated. And also there was the widespread bizarre imbalance in feats. But as a game and as an evolutionary step forward, it felt like it really was the last word on D&D. Now, as much as I love the game and as much as it interested me building characters and putting together different pieces, there were things about that game that did frustrate me. I always felt that combat was always tricky because you were never really sure what the challenge rating should be. And building and determining encounter levels based on challenge ratings always seemed uneven, and it really was optimized for four characters. But I always had groups that were up to 8 or 9, and so trying to strike that balance without wiping out my party every time was tricky. But I did love it, and so that's why. And so it was not a struggle at all to transition from creating stuff from as a fan to creating stuff in a semi-professional capacity. Because I mean, at that point, I was converting first and second edition modules over to third edition, and I would take when I would run adventure, I would rebuild every stat block to make them more optimized, more exciting, like making use of the Book of Vile Darkness, for example, or pulling monsters from other sources. So that was always tinkering.
So when you were running like an actual like campaign, were you running a homebrew campaign generally, or were you more of a, taking it from a campaign source book or running a bunch of adventures connected together? What was your style?
In second edition, I had my own setting, but then I would typically take existing published adventures and then rewrite them or rebuild them in some way that would fit in with the overarching story. And then we would slot in side tracks or campfire sessions where we just role played uh, and and created high drama and all that stuff. But this is at a time when I was newly married. I was gaming. I had three different gaming groups, and I was working at a game store, and then I went back to college, and then I was working. It was a crazy time, and I look back at that and think about how I was able to do that and still read books and still drink beer and still take care of a cat and stay married. It was pretty impressive.
So one of the things that I found from my time of playing third edition, because we played like 3E and then 3.5 pretty much straight up from its release till like fourth edition was announced. Um, and I felt like I spent a lot of time screwing around with mechanics and prestige classes and feats and build character builds and trying to build cool combats and stuff like that. And so that seemed to like take a sort of like the front of the game for me. And it wasn't until like much later down the line where I really started thinking like, hey, like I focus a lot on game mechanics and not so much on story. Was that Did you feel that have that same experience, or were you able to strike that balance between the like story side of the game and then the mechanic side of the game?
I hate to say it, but no. I felt I was in much the same boat as you were in, and I think that is one of the side effects of the development of the game. Right, when you are playing a fighter in second edition, the most you have to worry about are hit points and the number of attacks you can make around, and whether you're going to become double specialized in this weapon or not. Um, and the heaviest mental load you'd have to play with was whether or not you were playing a spellcaster, right? With third edition, because you had so many different buckets for customization, as you said, prestige classes plus feats, and then eventually skill talents and variant racial traits and all this other stuff. It became more of a. It seemed like the game really appealed more towards the optimizers, and I know that people could play third edition and fourth edition in a manner similar to second edition, but it's so freaking cool to see what your characters can do, and having a Diablo style dungeon hack and slash experience is a lot of fun, right? And it takes a lot of pressure off world building, and it becomes more about just seeing what the neat stuff that the game can do. So as much as I tried to keep some sort of story similar to what we had in second edition and third, it really became more of a what you were talking about. And then later, as I became as my life became took was shifted over to designing role playing game content, I had even less time for elaborate campaigns, intricate story stuff. I just don't have time for it, sadly.
So would you say that you're a game designer before being I guess like a uh, story creator or an adventure creator? Or do you feel like you've kind of like, as you've evolved in the field, that you've sort of mastered both of those?
I would hesitate to say master, but I do work well in both the narrative aspects and the mechanical aspects of game design. Uh, for years, I hated writing adventures because they're so complicated, and there's often so much wasted content when you're trying to cover and account for every situation. And I think I've only recently been able to figure out that you just have to trust the game master to be able to to fill in those gaps that you leave open. And in some cases, it's good to leave those gaps open because that's where the best stuff comes, right? Not just from my pristine words or muddy words. Uh, it, but they definitely take two different kinds of concentration, right? When I'm building a monster, for example, my head goes in a different place, even though I all my monster design now is story first, right? I think about how did this monster, well, that's not always true. Often is the case when I think about what the monster is going to look like in play, how the monster fits into the world, what's the monster's function, um, and try to build towards that rather than, all right, well, I need a monster that has a +2 bonus to attack rolls when standing on the lee side of a mountain during the winter months. So let's just build this thing around. Or I need a monster with cold resistance, for example. So we're going to build the cold resistance and let the mechanical needs inspire the design. I try to avoid that.
Do you feel like resentful when like do you ever have people when you've created these adventures and they're like, I don't understand. Why didn't Rob put this in here? Like how am I supposed to this thing's a piece of shit. How am I supposed to run this? Like, do you encounter that? And
Not so much anymore. One of the things that helps is that you don't look for that, and it keeps my sanity intact. I did get a ding, an unhappy review for the first adventure in the Rage of the Goblin King campaign, and they were really upset about the double cross at the end of that adventure. And it's like, well, that's kind of the point, right? I mean, that's the whole point of this is that goblins don't play fair and they don't play nice. And I'm sorry that it sucks that your characters didn't come out of that with more cool toys, but that's kind of the whole point. And I was very intentional about, hey, this adventure is supposed to make your players angry, and you're going to make them and supposed to hook them into this larger struggle with the Goblin King and the key to everywhere and all that stuff. But I also understand that a lot of reaction to games comes from a tension between what the expectations are and what they get. And so I try to do a better job communicating what the thing is ahead of time so that the expectations don't overshadow what I'm actually producing, if that makes much sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I guess if you're it's kind of like what's the thing that the Joker says when they in The Dark Knight, where it's like if it's all going according to plan, nobody freaks out.
Yeah,
It's
right.
so what kind of advice would you have for writers putting out adventures or putting out design, like a mechanical design, in terms of that, how to handle that kind of criticism that you get from the public once your work is out there?
Yeah, well, the good thing about the way the industry seems to be headed now is that it's it's not whenever you release something, it's not always final, right? There's not a re and it I think that game designers, especially the people who are just new to the field, should start by being open about, hey, this is an alpha or even a beta version of what I imagine the final product would be, and to use platforms like Drive Through RPG in order to get more eyes on the things that you're trying to make. Um, I think that you have to do some work before you release, obviously, or you could tarnish your name. It's good to have someone look over your work. It's good to pay for an editor. It's good to play test the hell at any kind of mechanical crunchy bit you're going to mess with. It's good to see, and it's good to do that blind too, where you give it to somebody and then let them play around with it, and then get back to you, so you don't influence the test. All those pieces are things to do as you're trying to get your feet under you and get started. Um, but I caution anybody who is thinking about doing it, because there is a cost when you shift from being a consumer of content and making this a hobby and trying to monetize your hobby. At a certain point, the adoration and affection you have for the things that got you in the first place tend to fade a bit as you look to your work as a way to generate income and to keep your lights on and keep your cats fed. It's harder to be super rah-rah enthusiastic after 20 25 years of churning out stuff.
Did you ever imagine that you would be in this position that you're in now? Was that
No, I
ever
had
like,
I had hilarious ideas that I was going to become the next great writer, and I stumbled into game design completely by accident. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I had always I've been tinkering with role playing games for all my life. Uh, Not all of it, but most of it. Um, but I saw publishing or getting being published in the role playing field as an opportunity for me to learn the craft of writing, and so I was more interested in telling stories and doing things along those lines and coming with novel ideas. But then as soon as I was involved and I saw how much work was involved in making game content, uh, all those ambitions kind of just faded away. I think it didn't take very long at all before I realized, hey, I think I might be onto something here. And even though I'm still making $600 a year, in the first 2 years I worked in the business, that $600 I didn't have before, after working 80 hours a week, I can certainly do more the next year. And so determination and certainly helped. Uh, and then by the time I was working with Wizards of the Coast, there was no doubt that I was ever going to be doing anything but this.
right? So before you get to Wizards, you're working with Green Ronin, um, and you end up getting to work on Warhammer.
Yeah.
What was that experience like? I imagine that going from someone who like played that as a kid to now being the guy behind it must have been a pretty heady experience.
It was. I you know I will say what made that entire what how I think I was able to survive that experience was that I was never a hardcore Warhammer Fantasy role play guy. I was a player. I did play it. I played Shadows over Bogenhofen, Death in the Reich, and I played. I had the books. I had the first printing of Warhammer Fantasy role play in hardback. So I was there, but this is at a time when I was still focused on D&D as my principal game. So when Chris Pramis, the designer of for second edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, brought me on, I did not expect to shift over and take on that on top of my D20 responsibilities, because at the time it was I was handling all the D20 stuff. Steve Kenson was handling all the Mutants and Mastermind stuff, and eventually Blue Rose and True 20, and then eventually the Warhammer came under my banner as Chris was shifting gears to work on what would become Dark Heresy. Um, I learned more about gaming and game design and writing from my time working with Black Industries, which they were the publishing house for Warhammer, than I did any time before. I Mark Gascoigne and Kate Flack and later Mike Mason were incredible guides and incredible developers who aided me and well, it should basically helping me improve and also helping to create a line of products that I think stand the test of time. Right? I mean, I had the privilege of writing Tome of Corruption, but we did a great vampire book and Children of the Horned Rat. There was the Pyramid Adventure, which I Lair of the Lich Lord, I think is what it's called, by Aaron Rosenberg, and we did a ton of great things for that game, and it was exciting. But it's also a game that comes with a very passionate fan base,
Hmm.
and they'll let you know when you screw up. There is no question.
Was there an experience that you had during that time where you were like, wow, I never would have expected to have, had this experience? Um, I don't know, someone you met or something that you did.
Yeah, I guess I start when I started working on Warhammer stuff. I met Kate Flack and her partner Paul at Gen Con, and at that same time I think we had Indian food with them and Dan Abnett, which
Oh,
was
wow.
neat. And Mark Gascoigne was there too, so I got to know them pretty well. And then shortly, it's either before or right after, I went out of the country for the first time, and we went for a series of meetings at Games Workshop headquarters in Nottingham, and it was really just a mind blowing experience being able to walk through Games Workshop, see where they're working on things that are years in advance, going through their miniatures library, eating at their canteen and their Bugman's Brewery bar they have on site, seeing how they made miniatures at a time before 3D printers really were much of a thing. It was an astonishing experience that kind of shaped uh, a lot of it prepared me for what I would do later on with Wizards, and just kind of knowing, because there's a difference between working for like a company like Games Workshop or Wizards of the Coast versus the smaller mom and pop companies like my own or Green Ronin or Paradigm Concepts or the others. So it was great, and I loved, and it was, and we certainly were rewarded awards wise for our labors. We did really well. Fans liked what we did, and it was an exciting period. I think the only thing that makes me sad was that we never got to do our third edition of that game, and that was something I had been working on until the license shifted from us to Fantasy Flight Games.
Are you able to talk a little bit about that in terms of, because I don't remember the timing of it exactly, but was the Fantasy Flight version, did that come out around the time that fourth edition D&D came out? Or am I conflating
Believe it
things?
came out right before, and they may have announced it at that show. I actually now I think back on it, I think they announced the same Gen Con that 4E dropped. Uh, or it was announced. If I remember right, it was right. It was they were a year apart or the same year. I had already left. We'd already stopped working on Warhammer Fantasy role playing, and I guess I was at that time I was working on A Song of Ice and Fire, the role playing game based on Game of Thrones, etc. Um, and I had a couple other things I was working on at that time too. And I remember going to the panel where they were talking about it and being really upset because it seemed like that the lead designs were slagging on the stuff that we had done and in order to prop up what they were doing. And so I'm very careful not to do that because I know how I felt as someone who worked on that game and that should be in the audience when you're hearing that. But and I think that they did the only thing I think they really could have done. Um, in hindsight, I think my third edition would have been closer. Well, it would have certainly been much closer to second edition. Uh, Theirs was a way to stand out and become even more relevant rather than just being an alternative to more traditional style gaming. It was simply completely different. And by appealing to a board game crowd with lots of pieces and parts, and then being able to monetize stuff like dice and expensive card boosts or booster packs was a really clever idea. Um, but I think it was so strange and so ahead of its time that I think ultimately it took Star Wars to really kind of make that system really work. Um, and then of course now that Cubicle 7 has it, they've gone back to a style closer to second edition, probably even closer to somewhere between first and second.
Yeah, so that I mean, my observation sort of between like D&D 5e and then Warhammer is that I feel like we had these two properties that people had very strong feelings about that had radical design changes, taken to them, radical world changes, maybe not so much in Warhammer at that time, but later on when they did Age of Sigmar for the miniatures line.
Right.
Um, and it feels like, the coming back, they basically said, okay, we're trying to come back closer to our roots. We're trying to like, grab those fan bases back. So do you feel like that was a mistake on their part to try to reach out like that? Or do you think like now today the audience would be more receptive to something like that? And it just was, like you said, something ahead of its time.
Well, we have to look at the time, like what was kind of going on in the industry at that time. The D20 bubble had burst, and all the companies who had converted their games over to D20 system games like Call of Cthulhu and Vampire and other things, all that was done, and I think there was to some degree a lot of fatigue in the RPG part of tabletop gaming, and that's a part of it, and then there's also the other part, which is World of Warcraft was doing gangbusters then, and there were a billion MMO clones that were running around that were offering a very similar experience. And when you think about people's entertainment budget as far as the amount of time they can put into things, uh, Warhammer Fantasy, World of Warcraft gave you a better gameplay experience than your stack of 1,000 D&D or D20 books that you've accumulated over the last 10 years. So I think it was making 4E a tactical strategy role playing game and making Warhammer more of a narrative game where you abstract a lot of the things and you're left to interpret die rolls based on symbols and recognizing those symbols and putting them together to kind of advance the story in interesting ways. Doing that, I think, were not desperate efforts, but interesting efforts to stay relevant in a field that was rapidly being drowned out by other types of entertainment. It's telling though that as D&D has come back and with fifth edition and become the darling of people's entertainment budgets, and with the proliferation of streamed games, that we were able to go back to an earlier form and style of play and kind of world concepts because the audience was hungry for it, and they made it very clear in fourth edition that they were hungry for it. But I also think that we're coming up to a point where that style of gameplay is probably bumping up against it, starting to run its course, and something new is going to have to come along to re-stimulate the entire industry again. I'm just waiting to see what that's going to be.
Interesting. What do you think that is? Um, do you like because I feel like when D&D 2024 came out, it didn't like excite people the way it was supposed to in terms
Yeah,
of the what Wizards probably wanted anyway. I'm sure they made a shitload of money on it, but maybe
right.
not as much to like corporate, money that they wanted to.
I would imagine that the business model is shifting more towards D&D Beyond. I think that probably is. I think there will always be people who put out books. I think there will always be people who put out PDFs and small products and more niche type things. But I think the big movers and shakers are going to be moving more towards AI driven dungeon mastering, using technology in order to deliver the play experience that they want. The thing about role playing games it's so hard is that you have no guarantee over what the customer's experience is going to be once they get the game. With a board game, you at least rely on the fact that the rules can be written in a way that teaches the audience how to engage with the game. But so much of Dungeons and Dragons and other role playing games relies on a game master interpreting those rules, building stories, kit bashing stuff together, and it's that well, there's no control over that, right? You have no idea what they're going to do with it, and I getting rid of the books and turning them into something that you consume through Character Builder is something that I anticipated 10 years ago. Uh, Playing online rather than in person is something that I think has also been. I mean, the pandemic helped with that, but I think it's going to become more and more of a norm if it isn't already. Um, yeah, I just see that the the elite companies like Wizards of the Coast and Games Workshop or whoever else that have the money to invest in a digital component will do so, and if they don't, they will partner with companies to deliver that same kind of concept.
So when you were working for Wizards, you had a bunch of cool products that you did for 3E, and then you transitioned to fourth edition. What were some of the highlights? What were the things where you were like, oh my God, this is like amazing. I'm so happy to be able to work on this, or I'm so proud of the product that I put out.
Yeah, with third edition, it was I was really lucky. I was at Gen Con and I was talking with my friend Rodney Thompson, who was also a freelancer at that time. And I said, because he was able to get work from Paizo, and he was even starting to do work for Wizards of the Coast. And I'm like, man, I've got to get in. I want to do a D&D book. And he's like, well, let me see if I can what I can do. And so he introduced Chris. He introduced me to Chris Perkins. We had a nice conversation, but I thought that was the end of it. I got an email offering me a gig on Tome of Magic, and my work on Tome of Magic was, Ari and David Noonan and who's the other person? Matt Cernett were the leads on the various magic systems that were in place, and I did all the supporting content. So I'm the one who did the adventure stuff, and I did some of the other prestige classes, and it was great, right? Because I got to do all sorts of interesting things with a with a product that was designed to take D&D into a different direction. And because that went so well, I was able to work on. I probably worked on almost every third edition book that came out after that, with maybe one or two exceptions. Like I didn't do the horror book or there were a couple others that I skipped out on, but I was able to do the big ones. And so that was fun. With the transition to fourth edition, I left Green Ronin Publishing to take a contract position for Wizards of the Coast, and I did that for a number of years, all through the life of fourth edition and through the design of fifth. And I went from being able to say, "Hey, I'm going to work on a book about devils," to being, "Hey, I got an assignment," or this month I get to write 10 articles for Dragon and Dungeon magazine. Let me put the gun in my mouth all the way. Uh, and so you might get to work on a dragon book, which is fine, but it's like, well, it's well paved territory. or you might get to work on the new Manual of Planes, which was fine and kind of neat. But later, as that game went on, I got to work on some projects that I felt were even more interesting, like what we were able to do with the Player's Handbook 3, where we introduced a psionic power source. I got to design almost all of the psionic handbook, which was fun too. And then as part of this, we also were trying to resurrect Gamma World, and Rich Baker and Bruce Cordell did the first Gamma World box set, and so I got to do the second one, Famine and Fargo, and so that was a big moment as well. I had a lot of fun with that. But designing for fourth edition is exciting because you have a lot more freedom than the game suggests. You can do all sorts of crazy stuff once you start picking apart the math and really looking at the way the game works. And I think that where that game struggled was that not everybody who worked in the game afterwards were involved at the beginning. And much like how I think third edition didn't really understand what feats we're going to do, I don't think that I think there was a tendency in fourth edition design to do a lot of box filling, right? We need to have, I can't tell you how many times people ask me, when are we going to get a Marshall controller? Well, you're not. You're just not going to ever get a Marshall controller. And looking at stuff like that there was a steep learning curve. But once we figured it out, the game started to sing. I think that's where like the D&D Essentials came in, where it started breaking apart the kind of the structure design that drove Player's Handbook 1 and 2 and took the game in a different direction as far as what kinds of powers, what frequency of powers will a character have. And then we got to introduce backgrounds and do all sorts of other neat things with that game. Dark Sun was probably the brightest moment in that whole period, though. I had a lot of fun with that.
I get the feeling like Dark Sun is like the setting that you're most in love with.
Greyhawk is my beloved setting. Dark Sun became an important setting to me because we played the hell of it second edition. My friend Bobby at the time was a big Dark Sun nerd, and so we played at least one or two campaigns through it, and then we tried the fourth edition Dark Sun, and that went for a bit, but then tonally it just wasn't the same. I had fun working on it, and I thought we got to do some interesting things with the game, but tonally it wasn't quite the same.
What do you feel about how Wizards has approached Greyhawk in the newest edition of the game? I feel like they were trying to throw a rope out to older players when they were putting that into the DMG.
Yeah, I remember one of the earlier ideas that we were fooling around with for fifth edition before it took its current shape was that I had begged and pleaded for us to just include in the Dungeon Master's Guide 2 to 8 pages for every setting of D&D that has ever been, and give you the basics. So like that way, if you want to play Dark Sun right out of the box when fifth edition comes along, you know what, we got a Thri-kreen and we've got the Mule. You're ready to go. And here's some brief descriptions on Kender for the Dragonlance setting. Here's some brief descriptions of Greyhawk, and then see what people are really interested in, right? Because the thing about D&D is that you don't need another version of Kryn. You don't, because Dragonlance has already been written to death. And so all you got to do is just go pick up the second edition stuff and you exercise some of your abilities as a game player and you're ready to go. I think I had always hoped that Greyhawk would be the underlying setting for fifth edition, like it was for third. But I think no one knew what fifth edition was going to be like and how it was going to be received. And so Forgotten Realms seemed, I think, the safest choice because that way you could get your core IP and your core game together in one, and then just proceed from there. And if it's the end, it's the end. But at least you've got it, and you can sell those books and keep your novel business going. I've barely thumbed through the 2024 books, but from what I can tell, I was pleased that they did it. I think it was the right move because they're not going to because it always felt strange for Tomb of Horrors to be in the Forgotten Realms. That is a Greyhawk place. Lost Caverns of Sajkan, that's a Greyhawk place. Demon Web Pits, also Greyhawk. Those are things like the big classic first edition adventures all belong to Greyhawk. And so I think that if we're going to if they're going to leverage the legacy of the game, then they should do it in a way that's consistent that the fans can recognize. And then if you want to make cool stuff for Forgotten Realms, make cool stuff for Forgotten Realms rather than shoehorning stuff from different worlds into it to make it work. It seems disingenuous, I guess.
So you're talking about Greyhawk. What exactly is it about Greyhawk though that grabs you?
The maps. I'll be Darlene's maps. When I was a kid and I was still just getting into D&D, when my parents would go looking for houses we had just moved to Nashville. I hadn't played D&D yet, but I always wanted to. And I remember we had gone to go look at a house that we were thinking about, that my parents thinking about buying. And upstairs in this kid's bedroom is this gigantic maps of Greyhawk with push pins in it showing where characters are, whatever campaign notes were about it. And I didn't want to leave the room. I was so entranced by that map. Later, when I got the gold box and I'm pulling it out, you just look at the stuff, look at what's on the map. It's like, man, I want to go there, right? I want to go over here. What is up here? And because it's hex based, it seems like it's possible. Like you could just, all we have to do is just go that direction, outfit ourselves, and go, and we'll do whatever adventures we have along the way. For the benefit of like hindsight, I could see that Greyhawk is kind of a hodgepodge world. It's combining all sorts of stuff from various novels, comics, films, real world cultures, and smashing it all together, much like Mystara did. But there's a there's a charm to D&D to Greyhawk that makes it seem to me more D&D than D&D itself is. When I think about Zagig or Rary or Nystol or all the other named magicians that were stomping around Greyhawk in the old days, you just don't. What is D&D without Tensor's floating disk? And if you don't, and to know what Tensor means, why that name's important, seems like it should be part of the D&D lore. So I'm all about it. I think it's a sexy world with all sorts of complicated stuff, and it's challenging, and it's got a deep history, and I would never want to work on it now because the fans who are real diehard fans know more about it than I could ever learn.
That's fair. What kind of a project would you have wanted to do if you had been given the chance to work on it?
Uh, at the time, I was arrogant enough to think that I could probably do Greyhawk justice, but that I had always really, and I begged and pleaded, and I tried to drop in as many Greyhawk things as I could into fourth edition during my time there. I would scour old books for things like, here's Fragarak, the Answerer, and some other weird weapons that appeared in the Arthur Arcana or older issues of Dragon magazine. And I was always trying to force that into the game where I could. Um, there was one 4E setting that we had that was on the books that Bill Slavisek and I think maybe Rich Baker had proposed, and it was more of an Arthurian style game where you're playing knights in this magical land, and I really wanted to do that. And I'm sad that it never came about, but it was just not in the cards, I guess.
So you start Schwalb Entertainment. Was that something that you had been like, dude, I've always wanted to create my own game. I finally have an opportunity. This is what I'm going to do. Was that something that was on your bingo card for that year?
Boy, I can't stress enough how difficult of a birth D&D fifth edition was. And during that process, there were lots of different project leads, lots of different design directions, lots of bitter and sometimes acrimonious arguments over various aspects of the game. There were times when uh, I was so frustrated and so angry about the situation that yeah. But at the same time, I learned, as much as I learned from my time with Games Workshop, I learned even more with Wizards of the Coast, and it was an extremely exciting time during a very narrow window to be able to say we can do something that will unify the hobby behind D&D again, and we're going to do something great. And so by the time my contract was up, and again, we didn't know if this was going to be it, right? I mean, I joked about we were writing our own pink slips. The closer we got to the end of the monster manual, the closer we were to all being on the street, because there wasn't any idea. I mean, D&D Next development time took twice as long as anyone expected. It was really a long, long, difficult journey. So by the time I got out, I was pretty angry and I needed to dump a lot of my negative emotions. And so that's what drove a lot of the design for Shadow of the Demon Lord. I could have gone back into the freelance trenches, and that was one option. I did a little bit of work for Monty Cook during that time, and I did some work with Matt Forbeck, and I may have done a few other things here and there. But I largely focused my time on developing this idea of Demon Lord, and it was not something that I think I probably had 45 drafts of that game before I took it to Kickstarter. Uh, Kickstarter was still new enough for me that I didn't know enough about it, and I wanted to make sure that I didn't get caught with my pants down and fail to deliver. So I made sure the game was as designed as I possibly could before I pulled the trigger. Um, so you'll see. So some of that game involves ideas that I had that either fell out of fifth edition design or ideas that I kept to myself in anticipation of eventually being able to use them elsewhere. Um, like the path system, which is such an important part of that game, grew out of this idea that this trying to solve this square this particular circle. There is a desire for maximum customization and an inability to absorb all the options in order to make reasonable choices for customization if you do both. And so by using paths as a way to deliver big customization choices into packages and then allowing those characters to develop in any way they want over 3 or 4 discrete periods of the character's career, enabled to some extent to achieve that. And I think I get closer to it in Weird Wizard, and I'll be even closer to it with the DLE games that are coming. But the initiative system is something that is another thing where it's like I can't stand the way D&D handles initiative. It drives me nuts. I hate the fact that I like it when you can go from strict narrative storytelling mode into tactical mode without having any kind of hoop you have to jump through, and being able to say, what do you want to do when you describe the scene that sets up the fast turn, and so it runs super easy. And then scooping up a lot of the bonuses that float around and make games complicated and super stressful into boons and banes as a way to manage penalties and benefits, bonuses rather. Also kind of reflected my dissatisfaction with the way things were kind of going in the games I'd worked on previously, while still being able to be gross and disgusting and have all sorts of demons running around and have poop jokes, do the stuff that makes me laugh.
You know, I feel like poop jokes are really underrated by a lot of people. I studied nursing, and one of the things I discovered is there's this thing called the Bristol stool chart.
Oh
And
my
it's
gosh, I don't know if I need to know this.
and it's
Oh,
it
great.
it's like
Tell me more.
it's a poster, and it's got various poops on it. And
Yeah,
and
all
and
right.
it's basically trying to show you like this is kind of what like a healthy poop should look like. And I was like, "Oh man, nobody ever told me that if you went to nursing school, you were going to learn about poop as much as I did." It was
Yeah, that's
incredible.
awesome.
Yeah. So, you
Like
know,
almost every home should have like a poster just embedded in the bathroom wall so you can
it's
compare and contrast.
honestly, I think if you're not looking at your poop before you flush it, there might be something wrong with you.
Yeah. I mean, there is something to be said for the courtesy flush, but
That is also fair. Look, we don't judge on the Dungeon Plunger podcast.
yeah,
Maybe a little bit, but
just a little bit.
um okay, so you started with Shadow of the Demon Lord. Then you came out with this. I didn't even bring the book with me, but it's on my shelf, but Punkapocalypse, which I was like, holy shit, this is When I saw this game, I was like, what the hell is going on? This is crazy, man. The art was insane. The content was brutal. How did you get connected with these guys? Like, did you know the company beforehand and you were like, dude, I need to make a game for this?
Yeah, it's so Demon Lord's out, and I've got I'm talking with my Spanish translator, and they're getting the game out for them, and it's going well. And he said, "Hey, there is a company you've got to work with, and it's these guys over at Bad Roll Games." And I said, "All right, well, send me the stuff." And so I get the link, and I look at their world, and it is bananas, right? And it is like I probably could have gotten away with a lot more 15 years ago. But to release in 2018 or whatever the hell I did release it, 2019, it was a daring. Like I had to rein in some of their stuff, right, just so I could get it to pass. Um, I had, and before I did Punkapocalyptic, I did a supplement called Godless, which was to be the first of many worlds that were going to be affected by the Demon Lord. They were going to be kind of modular units, and you just drop them in to your game. And I had originally floated the idea of writing that supplement in the same voice that I was going to use for Punkapocalyptic. And I asked a couple friends, my colleagues in the business, are like, "You can't do that. You just no, you cannot do that. Uh, People don't want that level of." So I backed off and gave it and delivered a more straightforward supplement. But with Punk, I felt that the IP was just raunchy and gonzo enough that it almost demanded a more confrontational style of game writing. And then also it was hard for me to. I guess it was also an opportunity for me to let my own cynicism through as we go through that book. Uh, they Punk was interesting. It didn't do as well in Kickstarter as I wanted, largely because I think it was just a little too aggressive. Um, I also think that is a field that is well planted with other post-apocalyptic games, especially Mad Max style. But we got all the stuff we were supposed to do for it out, and it's all done. And now it's seeing a second life in Brazil with my publishers down there, and they're doing great. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. I was My editor Tom had a lot of fun working on those books. The two of us together, were able to come up with a whole raft of deeply offensive things to say.
Do you think that it's like an issue with like a North American audience that there's certain things, or do you think it's just the way the world is today that we've become a much more I guess conservative? I don't know. That doesn't even make
I
sense?
think it's I think there is a tendency, and there has been over the last few years, to be more considerate, and I think that has benefits and drawbacks. I think that there is consideration is I think in our daily lives something that we should all aspire to do. I also think though that the media we consume doesn't and probably shouldn't be considerate, especially if you warn your customer what's going to be
Mm,
what they're in for. Like I think that Punk Apocalyptic can get away with it because it's what it is. It's just this thing. It doesn't. We talk about poop and we talk about vomiting, and we talk about trading sex for bullets and doing all sorts of other things. Uh, but I also try to do it. There is a way to do that kind of thing without being, I don't want to say offensive, but it's being cruel, right? Punching
right,
down. And
right, right.
that's the objective, is to not do that and to uplift rather than tear down.
That's fair. So you had sort of like teased for a very long time that you're working on Shadow of the Weird Wizard. And then finally 2023, you kickstart this sucker and it's out. People have it now. Um, what so you kind of like talked about how this book was meant to be sort of like a Shadow of the Demon Lord, but a little bit more family friendly kind of game. What was it about this that took so long for you to put it out? And I don't mean that in a to like what's the matter with you, Rob?
No,
But
sure, sure, yeah.
more in the sense of like it feels like this was something that you had a very specific vision for, and it wasn't coming out the way that you wanted it to.
Yeah, well, I started on it almost a year within a year after Demon Lord came out because I was getting a lot of pushback about how gross and violent Demon Lord was, and that people were like, "I love the game, but I can't play with my kids." And I wanted to answer that with a version of Demon Lord that would be more palatable. But I learned, but the thing about being a game designer is that you're always fiddling with the things you did before, and you want to make it better. Like it's not. I know perfection is the enemy of completion, or whatever that cliche is, but it's it's true, right? It's like you get to a point where it's like I know this game's not perfect, but this is as long as I can work on it. And with because of the way things shook out since the release of Demon Lord and the launch of the Kickstarter, there's a lot of things that went on. My wife's parents both passed. She was her caregiver for several years. We get adopted cats, lost cats, jobs got all sorts of chaos that happen in normal life that make it difficult to kind of focus. So the original plan of that game was just to be kind of a reskin of Demon Lord and just drop out the dark arts tradition, or the not dark arts, the forbidden tradition, and some of the other dodgier elements. And then as I was working on it, I was like, well, here's an opportunity for me to take some of the lessons I learned in Punkapocalyptic and bring them forward. Well, then if I do that, then I can go ahead and do something else. And that led to something else. So at one point, there was not a universal magic system. Magic was kind of a byproduct of what path you chose to kind of restrict your choices, not restrict your choice, but so you don't have to hunt through the book for different things. And then so the early drafts of that game had like witchcraft was its own thing, Sonic's its own thing. They all had the same kind of mathematical undercurrent, underpinning, but they all worked in different ways. And it was fun and neat and exciting, but it also meant that there was a lot of repetitive design and a lot of overlap. And then, as I'm taking to play testers, there's concerns that it's not doing enough. And so and then I started thinking about, well, if I'm going to make a heroic style game, I need to improve survivability of characters, which meant going back to the underlying math and rebuilding it. And that took some time and took a lot of false starts. And, by the time I was to a point where it was one of those things I kept working on in the background, but never getting anywhere with it. Out of nowhere, Kim Mohan's wife, said, "Hey, Kim's retired and he's really looking for something to do." And I was like, "Well, I've got Weird Wizard cooking and we can get this thing done. And maybe Kim's going to give me the kick in the pants to get this thing done." So at that time, my father-in-law was in the hospital and he was on the way out. And I'm working on the laptop and I'm sending files to Kim. Kim's sending it back to me, and we're going back and forth. And we're getting this game pulled together. I've got a playtest group on Discord going, and they're giving valuable insight and feedback. And the game just is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then my stepfather passes suddenly, and then Kim passes suddenly, and then I'm kind of in this situation. Was like, I got to get this done. This has got to get done. And I think that's when. So when finally took it to Kickstarter, I just I thought about like, well, I'm going to scrape out all this extra content from all this work that I've done and then release it later and then have a slim book. But then by the time I got to the Kickstarter, I was like, I'm exhausted. I don't want to mess with this anymore. We're just going to throw everything into the game and break it into 2 books and go. And so so by the time we got there, we went from Demon Lord is like 270 page book. This is a 516 page book, 616 pages, something big. 256 twice, whatever. Maybe it was 516, whatever, 512. But it's a lot of stuff. And so it has more paths than I initially imagined. It has more, and so then things changed, and it's just it was a kind of a weird start, but it's appropriate for the name of the game. It's a Weird Wizard after all, right? So, but now that things are kind of calming down at least a little bit, we're making progress on getting all the stuff I promised on Weird Wizard out, while still being able to work on all the other things that are burning holes in my desktop.
Right. I kind of feel bad about asking that question now. That that
It's all
sounds
right.
that sounds like something completely like horrible and brutal to
Well,
be
yeah, it
like,
was. In hindsight, again, it's like if something could go wrong during the development of that game, it did.
wow.
I mean, because when Ken passed, all of his edited files that were on his laptop never came back to me.
Oh
So it
no.
was like going back and starting over, and then in some respects, and it was just a lot of juggling. But since then, I've been working with Sue Wineland.
Okay.
She used to be part of Monty of Malhavoc Games and worked
Yep.
for Wizards of the Coast in TSR, and she is managing editing for all Weird Wizard products. And I still have a great staff of, or great team of people, not really staff, we're all contractors, but Kara Hamilton is still doing brilliant stuff with graphic design, and my buddy Jay is his eagle eyes keep me honest and on proofreading, and Tom Catterett and Jennifer Clark Wilkes handle a lot of my editing as well. So we've got a really good group and a very patient group who put up with my nonsense and shenanigans. But yeah,
You, I heard that you basically you didn't want to put out Shadow of the Demon Lord like a new version. You wanted to kind of keep it sort of like I know you did a revised version, but you don't want people to have to like buy a new book.
right.
Um, Now that you've worked on Weird Wizard and you've done all of this stuff, I mean, some of it I think you've done because of the flavor that you're trying to the type of fantasy you're trying to do more of a high fantasy type of thing. Um, do you feel like there's lessons that you learned in this game while you were designing it that you would like to go back now and maybe do another version of Demon Lord?
Yes, yeah. So one of the things that's come out of Weird Wizard was the idea to do the Demon Lord Engine series of rule books and worlds, and we released the Demon Lord Engine Rules Compendium, which just gives you what is effectively Chapter 2 of Demon Lord, but it's been updated with updated based on 10 years of exposure, and then also the work I put in on both Punk and Weird Wizard. We have 3 settings for this game, and they are coming out in chunks. So we have Abaddon, the Angel of the Void, which is a fantasy science fiction ring world that's floating in the void, and demons are kind of have overrun the place, and so you have your characters come from the one last bastion of civilization called Sanctuary Spire, and you're going out to reclaim the ring. So you traverse away from this place, and you get a mix of technology and machinery and weird monsters and demons and cultists and all sorts of other fun stuff. We also returned to Godless with a new world that's better defined and lacks a lot of the fantasy elements that were in the original Godless. And then we also have Shadow of the Red Moon, which is the twin sister planet of for Earth, and so we get to do a John Carter of Mars meets Gwar, I guess. Uh,
That's
so
awesome.
it's going to be gross and strange, but then we also have I've got let me look at my sheet here. We've got Right, so we've got a game set world called Colony, which will probably have a different name by the time it comes out, where you're survivors on a remote planet that you've lost touch with your home world. And then we have Demon Fall, where you play kind of like Space Marines and drop down to a demon world, and you're fighting to extract cool relics that you can use to then improve your gear and also feed back to your station. So we got a lot of stuff in the works for this. But the biggest thing that's probably in the work that I've got on my schedule after I clear out a few things is what I'm calling Shadow of the Demon Lord 666.
Oh wow, okay. That's cool.
Um, it is not a new edition in the traditional sense. It is uh, it is a new game that takes place 666 years after the end of Return of the Witch King. So Return of the Witch King and Orc Wars, those 2 campaigns are both setting this up to be the big catastrophe that will happen later. And it's spoiler alert, the new god is going to die, and a lot of the fairies are going to get wiped out, and the continent's going to shift and kind of hell will fall in, the underworld will empty. It's going to be a really dire and bleak place. But in this setting, it's kind of the rebuilding from that time. So there will be you'll be able to go and look at stuff from the old game, which will still be fully functional and will occasionally receive support, but it will be its own thing.
It's always tricky when it comes to these kinds of things. So
Right.
what kind of a timeline do you expect for that?
I expect to start writing late 2026 and then be ready to go with it in 2027. Because it's going to probably take me a good. I've got 4 adventures left in Return of the Witch King series, but I have 7 adventures left in Orc Wars, and I still have to get Weird Wizard product out and wrap up the Black Star stuff that I'm doing for Demon Lord as well. So there are a lot of things that are competing with my time, competing for my time. But I really would like to get it out in 2027.
I've noticed that because like with Weird Wizard, I get the updates every time that you've got a new adventure that's ready, and then I download it and everything like that, which is awesome. I always love that. Is there, and I noticed that same thing for Shadow of the Demon Lord, that there's a lot of these sort of like one-shotters that keep coming out periodically. Is this something that like eventually will be collected into like a big book kind of thing, or is it just for you, it's just so much easier, like now we're just PDF it?
There's a lot of uncertainty in printing and manufacturing right now due to tariff proliferation. That's one part of it. I'm not, it became printing got so expensive that the only options for printing was to go through Lithuania, China. There was a printer thing in Colombia, but then you have all the logistics of trying to get that stuff to the United States, and then there's also the cost of shipping from the United States to anywhere outside of the United States is outrageous. And so then you have to bring in a partner to do all sorts of other stuff. And so the options are kind of limited for anybody who's not, a top tier company. Um, I think right now the benefit print on demand is so good that it's good enough to kind of cover that, I guess, for now. I don't know if we're going to do compilations because compilations kind of require me to go back in time and then revise and compile. I do like the fact that people do get to pick and choose what they use, and there is I think there is a benefit to being able to say like I need an adventure for a night. Rob's got 50 adventures for Demon Lord. I'm just going to go grab this one for $2 and be able to go rather than say, hey, I've got this $50 book that I've got on my shelf. I've used one adventure from it and I never get to use it again. And I've got a feel bad moment. So yeah, it's going to be, it'll end up being about the same amount of money, but you get to choose what you get. And since I figure that most people now are role playing on using tablets or phones for character sheets, print stuff is not, it's just not a lot of, there's not enough demand for it right now for me to do big compilations. We're more likely to continue to do bundles where you can get a bunch of PDFs for a discount or something like that.
Right. It sounds like we need to start doing bootlegging RPGs, kind of,
Right.
sneaking them past the border.
Yeah. I was like I just think back to handling logistics for a Weird Wizard. And because a Weird Wizard did a lot, it was a much more successful campaign than Demon Lord was. But, you've got war in the I've got customers who can't get customers in Israel who can't get stuff because of the war in Gaza, and you can't get stuff to Ukraine. You got customers over there that we're not shipping to anymore, and there's a lot of uncertainty that's kind of about getting stuff to people where they are, and then like shipping even the United States right now is media mail is it's still the most reasonable option, but you've got no guarantee in the condition you're going to get your product in. And sending stuff to Brazil is also tricky because you may never get to the customer. It may just disappear in customs. So there's just a lot of logistical problems with that. And when your margins are as thin as they are, you just don't want to take that kind of risk that you're going to be on the hook for another $5,000 you weren't planning to spend. And that certainly came up plenty of times in the Weird Wizard fulfillment.
So what it sounds like is that the custom agents in Brazil are huge Shadow of the Weird Wizard fans.
They're enormous Demon Lord Weird Wizard fans. They really are.
Oh man. Well, dude, this has been such an amazing conversation. I'm so glad to have had an opportunity to like pick your brain and, learn more about your time working on these amazing products. One of the things that I ask all of my guests is what kind of advice would you offer a novice or a veteran game master, either and or um, running the game?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. This has been an incredible time, and it's been nice to hang out with you and talk all sorts of nerd stuff, which I like to do. My advice is the one thing I have to keep telling myself before I run a game, and that is I should never feel like I'm about to give a presentation in a college class before I run a game. And so the way to avoid that is to relax, let your players drive the descriptions, tell them what those basic things that you know, and if they have questions, they're going to ask. Don't sweat the big plots. Let it go whichever way it goes, because all the fun stuff is the stuff that's never scripted. Um, so that those are some general advice for the kids at home.
I like it. Well, uh, again, I really appreciate you being on the show, Rob. Helping me plunge the dungeon and flush
Yes,
evil down the drain. I'm really sorry that we had to have the poop conversation.
it's great. I'm just
um,
German enough to enjoy it.
things that got said on the podcast that I wasn't ready for. Um, and just because apparently people aren't aware, I do have Facebook. Well, Dungeon Plunger has Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky X, and TikTok. Where can people find you, Rob?
Facebook under me, my name or the company name. We're also on Blue Sky as Schwalb Entertainment. And then I have an Instagram page, but the company doesn't. We're not quite on TikTok yet, but we might be. And then we also have a Discord group that is a vibrant and violent community. It's wonderful. You get all your questions answered there. And if you, when in doubt, go to schwalbentertainment.com for all your Demon Lord, Weird Wizard, Punkapocalyptic, and other juicy bits.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And until next time, plungers up.